Welcome back to Landmark Cases in a Nutshell. Today we'll be covering Miranda versus Arizona. This is the case where the Supreme Court ruled that the Fifth Amendment requires law enforcement officials to tell suspects of their right to remain silent and to obtain an attorney before being interrogated while in police custody. After being identified in a police lineup, Ernesto Miranda was arrested and charged for the kidnapping and rape of Lois Ann Jamison. The police questioned him for 2 hours without informing him of his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination or his Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. Miranda then confessed to the crimes and provided the police with a written statement where he wrote that he was aware of his right against self-incrimination despite never being informed of it. His confession was used as evidence at his trial, and he was convicted and sentenced to 20 to 30 years in prison on each count. Miranda appealed the case to the Arizona Supreme Court. His defense attorney contended that because he had not been advised of his rights or had counsel present throughout his questioning, his confession should have been omitted from evidence at the trial. The police admitted that Miranda's rights were not explained to him, but the state countered that Miranda must have already been aware of his rights because he had previously been convicted of a crime. Miranda's appeal was dismissed, and his conviction was maintained by the Arizona Supreme Court. In 1965, Miranda appealed his case to the United States Supreme Court. The court agreed to hear the case along with 3 other similar cases. The court had to decide what role the police have in preserving a suspect's rights under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments of the Constitution, as well as whether the Fifth Amendment's prohibition on self-incrimination applies to police questioning of a suspect. The court ruled that under the Fifth Amendment, law enforcement officers must inform suspects of their right to stay silent and their right to an attorney during interrogations while in police custody. In the majority opinion, Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote that procedural safeguards are required to secure the privilege against self-incrimination. In the absence of adequate safeguards, the process of in-custody questioning had inherent compelling forces that undermined the individual's ability to resist and compelled them to speak. Therefore, defendants must be informed that they have the right to remain silent, that anything they say can and will be used against them in a court of law, that they have the right to an attorney, and if they cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for them. These are now often referred to as the Miranda rights. The court also established that after receiving these warnings, a defendant could knowingly and intelligently waive their rights and agree to answer questions or make a statement. But evidence obtained during interrogation could not be used against a defendant at trial unless the prosecution proved that the warnings were given and willfully and intelligently waived. The decision was heavily criticized at the time for providing criminals with further means to avoid punishment, and Congress even sought to overturn it through legislation. However, that legislation was struck down, and the court has maintained over time that the Miranda warnings are still constitutionally required. As for Ernesto Miranda, he was retried for the crimes using new evidence and was still sentenced to 20 to 30 years in prison. He ended up being released only 5 years later on parole, but was eventually killed in an incident that police never resolved, mainly because the suspect exercised his Miranda right to silence. So, despite the fact that the case had far-reaching consequences for the American criminal justice system, it ended up benefiting Miranda very little. Alright, that's all for this case. Thanks for watching, and feel free to leave any questions in the comments.